Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I do apologise because I think my connection is not so great this evening, so please bear with me. I might keep sort of looking down as I play with my connection through my wireless. Yeah, I'm still in the age of using wireless and I don't have broadband fitted in our home yet, but hopefully that will be happening this weekend and I cannot wait. Okay, so the power of technology. So good evening, and I would like to say thank you to Elaine for inviting me to be the guest speaker this evening. I came a little bit unprepared, so I do apologise because I've prepared, well, a little bit unprepared. I've prepared absolutely nothing, so which is completely my fault. So I will just roll it out there and hope for the best. But I chose the topic of my trauma, my superpower. So I'm just going to give a little backstory into who I am, what I do, where I come from to a certain level. So my name is Mayameen Meftahi, and I'm actually a specialist in psychological trauma. So I've been working in the field of psychological trauma for a very long time. I think about 8 years now in total. And I kind of been through that journey, that path of starting out as a counsellor, getting bored of counselling. I'm so sorry to all the counsellors. I know you are fantastic, but I'm a little bit too practical. So I went through the journey of being a counsellor, psychotherapist, and then I studied in NLP. Anybody who's done NLP, give me a hi, give me a little yes, because NLP is fantastic. It's linguistic programming, which is kind of like trying to reframe the brain and all of that stuff, and it's fantastic. So that was my kind of starting out journey. And what happened was, as I progressed through this, I came into working with sexual violence. I say came, there's the backstory. And I've been working very well for a very long time, doing what I do. And actually, I was quite known in that sense for working with controversial topics like female genital mutilation. Yep, FGM is my specialist area, forced marriage, trafficking. So some really heavy, deep stuff that I was and still am really heavily involved in. So building up an organization, building up a business, having children, hard, and anyone who's been there and has done that knows how hard that is. But there was always something that was kind of I suppose a deep secret, a silence. So I always found it really interesting when I had clients or when I met people or I did public speaking, because I've been on TEDx, you know, I've taken the stage to TEDx, that people would say to me, where does your passion come from? You know, what is your why? What is your fight? And to be honest, I couldn't tell them. I couldn't tell them because it was a secret, and I was still silenced. So just going into that, you know, that kind of like that silencing. So what it was I was actually, or am, a victim of child sexual abuse. Now, when I say that, actually what happened was my father was arrested in 2011. So I was on holiday with my husband and my first child at the time, back in 2011. And my father's played a role in my life still to that point. And I get a phone call to say that my father had been arrested. And it was an absolute huge shock to me. I was so taken back by the whole situation, because what were you arresting my father for? And the police officer turned and said on the phone, you're safe now. And I'm like, you're a little bit too late to try and save me now, right? You're calling me in 2011, yeah? I'm in my late 20s, I've got a husband, I've got a child, and you're ringing me to tell me that I'm safe now. Anyhow, I was actually on holiday at the time in Tunisia, where my husband's, my in-laws, my husband's family are from, and I came back to the UK. So when I came back to the UK, obviously, this complete eruption, whirlwind of my life just turned upside down. So whilst I'd been away, my father had been arrested due to his perverse actions, if you like. And unfortunately, it hadn't stopped. So I had been groomed and believed that this was child sexual abuse, but unfortunately, loads of stuff unraveled, and he had never stopped. That's what they do. So anyway, long story short, he was arrested. They unraveled so much evidence, it was unbelievable. And they had actually said to me when they called me that I didn't need to do anything. Now, anyone who's been through, this is a kind of a trigger warning. I'm talking about something quite triggering. So in terms of a trigger warning of child abuse, anyone who's been through that will know that it's a lengthy process to try to get your voice heard or unsilenced. And I didn't actually have to do anything. And I think I'm lucky in a sense for that, although I feel that I can't connect to others that haven't had that. So my father was sentenced to 10 years in prison in 2012 for abuse and rape, because he went on to date rape, unfortunately, which is why he was eventually picked up. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The evidence, I didn't need to do anything because unfortunately, maybe lucky enough, there was about 60 plus hours of video footage of my lifespan of abuse and rape. So that was used, and I didn't need to do anything, but I did attend. And as I said, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. So that was in 2012. And that's when I kind of then started to launch my career. So the 2012, 2013, 14, 15, 16, I continued my career. But there was always a silence, because nobody knew this backstory about me. Nobody knew what I'd been through. So when they asked me, where does your passion come from? How are you so involved in this? How can you do this heavy, deep work of involved with sexual violence? Well, that's why I could. But the interesting thing was, maybe many of us have been groomed and conditioned that your story is your own to keep. And it's like a kind of type of imposter syndrome, I suppose, where I always had this dark, deep secret still. I'm still silent. I'd had anonymity from the judge, and I could go on with my life and continue, and I did. But there was still always that pull at the back of me that I'm never being true to myself. I'm not being true to the people I'm working with, to the women I'm supporting. But it is that imposter syndrome. Well, if they really knew about me, what would they think? And if they really, knew that situation, would I still be classified as, a professional when I'm actually a service user as well, because I'm still under victim support, because, my father was sentenced to prison. So your victim support continues. So there was always like this type of imposter syndrome. And I think any of us can relate to that, whether it's through our health, whether it's through our backstories, whether it's through what we've been through, whether it's through business, that sense of, am I really capable to do that? And how can I help them if I can't even help myself? So every day there was this ongoing struggle of, I'm a fake, I'm a fraud, people really know who I am. And it actually got to quite an extreme point where it started to affect my mental health, because there's only so much of kind of imposter syndrome that you can take, where you start to believe that actually I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing, or, I'm not capable of doing that when I've got this service user side in one aspect, but I'm going out and I'm championing and helping women to overcome psychological trauma. And there's days when I'm sure we all feel like that, where we're doing stuff, we're good to preach, and we can tell somebody, we can be that shoulder to cry on, we can be that one that says, oh, this is what you've got to do, but then we go home and we can't do it ourselves. Or we go home and we just think, if only I could just take my own advice, I'd be so much better. But that is the point. That's the point of who we are as people, because we want to give and give and give to others, to, in a way, I suppose, to self-heal. To help ourselves, because the more that we can help others, then we can kind of satisfy our own needs. So, jumping forward to years on, I was absolutely blessed to take the stage of TEDx in 2016, and I was talking about sexual violence. And interestingly enough, when I look back at my TEDx talk, I slipped a little bit, and I mentioned about my mother, and I mentioned about my childhood, but I never really divulged into that. I didn't want people to know, and I didn't want to waive my anonymity that the judge had given me. So jumping forward into 2018, Loads of stuff had happened, lots of life events had gone on, and my father, unfortunately, is quite an intelligent man in many sick, perverted ways, in the sense that he's relied on power throughout his whole entire life. That's how he's managed to achieve what he's achieved through his lifespan. And so it was really interesting, because he was sentenced to 10 years in prison, that I then got a phone call to say that he'd served 6 years and that they weren't having to release him because he served over half of his sentence. And I just found it so demoralizing that he was coming out. But that was my personal side, that wasn't my professional side. But interestingly enough, in the 6 years that he had been in prison, I had, in a way, I suppose, just got on with things and had to deal with all the traumas and the PTSD that I was suffering. And then I had to have this other face of helping others and using my trauma to be my superpower to get where I needed to be in my life. And interestingly enough, for the first time in March 2018, when I got the phone call to say that he was going to be released and there was absolutely nothing they could do about it. They know that he's a high-profile sex offender. They know that he had not rehabilitated, if that's even possible, but that's a personal opinion. And they knew that he serves a risk to the society, but their hands were tied, as it is by the law. Now, for some uncanny, ironic reason, whatever you believe it to be, I Googled his name, and I've never done that before, ever. And as I Googled his name, his name, like HMP Chelmsford, and his name in Southend-on-Sea, where I'm originally from, he came up like top of Google, and it said HMP Chelmsford, man set on fire. So instantly I'm thinking, okay, he's been set on fire and nobody's told me, but they've just told me that he's been released. Well, I looked at the date on the article, and it was 2014. Right? So he was sentenced in 2012 officially, though he'd served bail. It was 2014. So I'm scrolling through the article. My heart just literally stopped. I remember it like it was yesterday. And I'm scrolling through the article on, online, to then read that, this man had set himself on fire. And there was an inquiry, an investigation. And Edward Colby, being my father, who was a serving prisoner at HMP Chelmsford, a trained Samaritan support listener in his wing, had been supporting the person who had set himself on fire. And I didn't know at that point whether to laugh or cry, because I was so expecting to read that he was dead, or he was the one set on fire. And yet then I was reading that my father, who was sentenced to 10 years in prison for child sexual abuse and rape and use of drugs and lots of underlying stuff, which I'm not going to go into, because if you wanted to read more about my story, it's been in the press, it's been viral, it's been worldwide, and you can read it from my website, was a trained listener by Samaritans for their prison project in prison. And I'm on the outside of prison supporting women who have been through sexual violence and psychological trauma. You couldn't make this stuff up, to be honest, if you tried. And it was quite ironic that he was then in the press. He was the heroine for helping, or trying to help, this guy who unfortunately set himself on fire. And all of a sudden, for the first time in 6 years since my father had been sentenced to prison, and in 6 years that I had worked so hard to get to where I am at that point of time, to build an organisation, to deal with 3 children, to have a husband, to keep my marriage together after this news erupted, because I'd been married for many years before my father was sentenced. It was just so deep, and it's so complex. And all of a sudden, I'd suffered for so long with imposter syndrome that, I'm not really true to people, and I can't really help people. And I just constantly was giving and giving and giving, to then realize that actually there was somebody else on the complete opposite end of the scale doing what I was doing. and it just could not continue. So at that moment of time, within that split decision, I turned and said, enough is enough. I'm waiving my anonymity. You cannot protect me. The police cannot protect me. Nobody can protect my children. Only I can do that. And you're about to release this man, a man who has served his half time and clearly done really well in terms of understanding the system to gain his power, his superpower in prison. And at that point of time, I just literally made the crunch decision. I'm speaking out. I'm waiving my anonymity. I'm taking my power and I'm going to use it. And I'm going to take back my power of being silenced for so many years for an act that I did not do, and carrying somebody else's burden for so long. Because while I remained silent, my father in prison was also silent. So he could continue what he's doing. And he was about to enter into the free world after serving just 6 years to continue his life. And I've got the life sentence, and that was not acceptable. And it was at that point of time when I literally decided enough was enough. And I'm not going to go into too much detail because you can read all about it. It went out in That's Life magazine. I did my first ever Facebook video for like 9 minutes that went viral and reached 15,000 views. And it just went off the top. And that was brilliant in a sense because I needed to heal and I needed to be who I wanted to be. And this is the problem when you go through trauma, is you don't know who you are anymore. You lose your identity, okay? You suffer with all this self-talk that's so negative. You know, I'm damaged goods. I'm not worthy of that. If they really knew who I was, if they really saw what I had done. And that's the issue when we have PTSD or mental health or depression or whatever label you want to put on it. It comes down to the fact that we have traumatic life events and they accumulate and we don't know how to process them. And it was through that processing of being able to take back my power and being able to turn around and say, do you know what? I can't do much more than I've already done. But I can't continue living like this either. And it was the most empowering thing. I can't say that I would encourage everybody to go through it because you have to be at your own sense of time. But what I will turn around and say to you, seriously, is never ever let what happened to you be the definition of you. Let what happened to you be, who do you want to be? What do you want to be? Because absolutely every single one of us has suffered a trauma. It doesn't matter to what scale, what level you want to put it in, it does not matter. And I'm not here, and I don't like to listen to about scaling of trauma. Well, you've had a big trauma and that's not. It does not matter. Every single one of us has suffered a trauma, whether that be a bereavement, whether you've lost your mother, your father, your friend, whether you've been in a car accident, whether you've had cancer, whether you've whatever it is, you have suffered and you've got them symptoms of PTSD, because once you've had a life event that changes who you are or who you were, then you've got PTSD, or you've had the symptom of it. And the most important thing is you don't allow that to define who you are. And, you know, and I've spoken about this on many times, how, you know, don't come along and try and save me when I've been saving myself for years. Okay, don't come along and try and be my rescuer when I've had to rescue myself to keep me sane to where I am today. But I'm not going to be a statistic, and I wasn't going to be a silent statistic. I was going to show the success, and that's not success in my organization or my company or how many clients I work with. It's success in here. Success in here, to be able to free myself from the entrapments of the PTSD that was holding on to me, because I didn't see it as a power. I saw it as being disempowered. I saw it as that they would know, and I grew up groomed. I grew up silenced. You never speak about this stuff. You do not talk about this topic, because if you do, you will be shameful. And ironically, when I spoke out and I waived my anonymity and it went viral, in 24 hours, I had 22 people reach out to me. 22 turn around and say, me too. I get this and I don't know what to do. And I'm so glad you shared your story. And it was very overwhelming, but I get it, because at the end of the day, we don't grow up or we don't go through a trauma and see it as our superpower. So I guess that's what I really wanted to kind of share with you tonight, is about how having a traumatic life event, having whatever symptoms you've had from that, doesn't have to be the definition of you. You know, you can define it in whichever way you want, and it's, you know, define the success. So I always say that, you know, if anyone can, you can. And it became a motto of mine, and everybody may, you know, if you hashtag in Facebook, hashtag if she can, I can, you'll find all the posts connected to me and my work and everything I do, because absolutely anyone can change the situation they are in when they start to see the definition of it, when they start to see that it doesn't have to define you in the negative, and it doesn't have to define you, and you don't have to label yourself and put yourself in that box anymore. You can absolutely be who you want to be, and it's never too late. Absolutely never ever too late. I don't care. You know, I run a 7-week PTSD recovery program, and it's an online live weekly program, and I'm so blessed that I've, over 2.5 years, have managed to work with hundreds of women who have come on this program. And I always say, I don't care how old you are, at what point you want to turn your life around, and I don't even need to know what your trauma is. I don't need to know, because if you want to be someone, you deserve to be that person. So never ever let what's happened to you be the definition of you. And I guess I've kind of run dry in that sense of repeating it, but you know, it's just really, really important that we talk about these subjects, and we talk about what we've been through. And I'm not saying that you have to now go and expose yourself to the world and open up your vulnerabilities, but we have to heal. We do not have to carry the burden of somebody else's life events onto us. You know, we deserve to be free from that. And whichever way it has to be, whether you connect with me, whether you connect with Elaine, whether you connect with any, you know, someone down the street, or whether you go public or whether you go private, it does not matter. What matters is that you know that you are super powerful, and that you don't have to be disempowered by whatever happens to you. So I'm going to finish up there and just say thank you so much. I really hope that this serves as a benefit to somebody that's going through any form of suffering, that's been through any form of violence, any form of psychological trauma, that, you know, use it as your superpower. It takes a long time. It's not easy to do. You know, I still struggle daily with my own demons, but there's a sense of healing that has happened throughout this process. There's a sense of retaking back and gaining back my power, so that, you know, I can't be controlled by it any longer. So I do hope that if anyone has been triggered by the topic, I've tried not to go into too much detail about it either, because I realise that it's still one of those you know, hard topics to talk about. So you can go over to my Facebook page, She Can Consultancy. You can pop onto my website. You can read about the story. It's in the press. There's a Channel 5 documentary that went out a couple months ago that I you know, was part of, and just creating the awareness and the campaigning that I do. But most importantly, if you have suffered from PTSD, or you suffer with anxiety, then again, jump on, speak to somebody, get in touch with me, get in touch with Elaine. I run a recovery program that's really accessible and affordable, and just always remember that, like I said, if she can, I can, you know, and if I can, you can, and just continue with your superpower. So I'm going to love and light and pass on blessings to you all, and I hope you all have taken something from this. Good night and God bless.